Hello, fellow students of history. This lecture concerns the California Gold Rush, an exciting, pivotal moment in American history that completely transforms um, California and lays the foundation for an emerging, thriving, progressive United States on the West Coast. The California Gold Rush constitutes one of the most extraordinary events in US and world history. Beginning in 1848, when gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill in Coloma, California, for several years, thousands of mostly young men from across the United States, Mexico and Latin America, China, and Europe caught gold fever, said goodbye to their families, and made the arduous journey to the port of San Francisco. By wagon, by ship, on horseback, and some on foot, dazzled young men dreamed of what gold fortunes might mean for their otherwise poor lives. Virtually overnight, the small town of San Francisco, not long before called Yerba Buena, transformed into a bustling, crowded, muddied mass of hundreds of thousands of young men seeking their fortunes, heading for the hills and rivers, returning back to the city to waste away their gold with gambling, fine clothes, gold teeth, drink, drugs, and prostitutes. A few men amassed fortunes, while most men never gathered the gold they were seeking or spent all they had in houses of ill repute in what was probably the most raucous city in the world at that time, San Francisco. The gold rush coincided with the US invasion and takeover in Mexico, California, the largest mass migration in US history, and the incorporation of California into the Union in 1850 laid the groundwork for a new, emerging America on the West Coast. California caught the attention and imagination of the entire world. Again, the largest migration in US history. In March 1848, about 150,000 people lived in the California territory, including 150,000 Native Americans, around 6,500 Californios, and an estimated 800 non-Native Americans. In less than 2 years, the non-Native population climbed to more than 100,000. There were more than 300,000 new arrivals by the mid-1850s, with more pouring in at a constant pace well into the 20th century. Again, California had captured the imagination of the nation and world. How did the gold rush transform the United States? This is a question we need to ask of every period in American history, every major event in American history. How did this moment change the United States? What was the United States like before the event or era? And what was the United States like after, as a consequence of the events within that era? So how did the gold rush transform the US? Because historians are concerned with change over time. Change over time. Number one, the California gold rush completely transformed California from a faraway Mexican outpost to the beginning of a thriving, cosmopolitan, 31st state of a dynamic, progressive young America. Number two, the gold rush facilitated one of the largest mass migrations in history. Young men, mostly young men, of course there were young women also, but in the beginning stages it was mostly young men. Young men from all over the globe left their homelands to seek their fortunes in California. The word for California in China at this time was called Gold Mountain. Gold Mountain. So you can imagine the imaginations of young Chinese men before they hopped their ships on what they were to find at Gold Mountain. While most did not strike it rich, they laid the foundation for an emerging new way of life, a multi-ethnic, multicultural region not seen since ancient Rome. Number 3, the gold rush must be seen in the context of the Industrial Revolution. Wealth created by gold fortunes and investments acted as economic seeds across the state as towns, banks, colleges, factories, and ports were built and grew into the California of today. California's Central Valley, where I live in Fresno, the nation's breadbasket, is a consequence of the gold rush era. Here's from a speech that President James Polk gave in 1848 when rumors were circulating around the country that gold had been found. And as these rumors reached the East Coast, many people didn't believe the rumors because they were so fantastic. Men were going to streams and just picking up gold nuggets from the ground. This was what the Spanish were dreaming of ever since the conquest, right? Finding the mother lode, or even the city of gold, El Dorado. But as these reports went back to the East Coast, people thought they were fake. So the president gave these words on the veracity of the reports. Here's President James K. Polk, December 5th, 1848, in his 4th annual message to Congress. The accounts of the abundance of gold in that territory, California, are of such an extraordinary character as would scarcely command belief were they not corroborated by the authentic reports of officers in the public service who have visited the mineral district and derived the facts which they detail from personal observation. Reluctant to credit reports in general circulation as to the quantity of gold, the officer commanding our forces in California visited the mineral district in July last for the purpose of obtaining accurate information on the subject. His report to the War Department of the result of his examination and the facts obtained on the spot is herewith laid before Congress. When he visited the country, there were about 4,000 persons engaged in collecting gold. There is every reason to believe that the number of persons so employed has since been augmented. The explorations already made warrant the belief that the supply is very large and that gold is found at various places in an extensive district of country. Now, once President Polk addresses Congress and verifies the reports, gold fever hits America and circulates across the world because the President of the United States has just verified that these reports are true. Here's a quote by James Marshall recalling first discovering gold at Sutter's Mill, where gold was first discovered during this time period. It made my heart thump, for I was certain it was gold. And as we study history, it's important to understand the context of the time that we're studying. So just briefly, the gold rush in a 19th century context, because there were so many things happening in the 19th century, so many vital milestones. It's redundant, right? Vital milestones. Many milestones are happening in the 19th century that transform America. Here are a few of them. The westward push, American migration, foreign immigration. Millions of Europeans and Asians, mostly Europeans, are flooding into the United States. The top two nations are Germany and Ireland, but also later 19th century, we see many Southern Europeans come in to the United States. Spaniards, Portuguese, Italians, Greeks. and Russians and Jews also from Eastern Europe, Catholics and Eastern Orthodox observers. The Texas Revolution, which was a precursor to the Mexican-American War. The Mexican-American War, which doubled the size of America. Native American conflict and genocide, a consequence of the westward push to manifest destiny, as we cover in another lecture. Sectional conflict leading to civil war. Another consequence of the westward push is this conflict that exacerbates over the first few decades of the 19th century between the North and South. As America pushes westward, the debate is whether the new territories and states will be free or be slave. And each section has their own vision for the future of America, slave or free. And this will eventually lead in 1861 to the Civil War. And lastly, manifest destiny, which overshadows many of these other milestones in 19th century America. And I provide a timeline of four slides of dates. We're not going to go over all these dates, but they're for your perusal. You may take a history class, and some historians might say dates aren't important. Well, I believe dates are very important. They provide a skeletal framework on which you will hang the events in the human experience. But without a skeletal framework of dates, events and peoples and places, they're floating. Imagine objects floating in space without any gravity and just circularly. There are no points of reference. Well, there are, but when you have dates, you have definite points of reference. You have cause and effect. You have consequences. You can see very clearly what came before and what comes after. So the date itself isn't the essence of history, but it provides a skeletal framework. One of the essential characteristics to understanding change over time. How can you understand change over time if you don't have a skeletal framework of dates in your minds? They're very important. This is what I believe. So here are 4 slides for you to understand change over time during this time period. The following are 4 laws that are passed by the California legislature, this nascent California legislature that emerges after the conquest of Mexico by the United States of America, when California is a newly emerged American states. And there are 4 laws passed restricting the bodies, the freedom, the movement, the labor of non-white peoples, Mexicans, Chinese, to a lesser extent, other Latin Americans, Native Americans, in very derogatory ways. So I'll read this out. As you read about the following 4 laws, critically think about what each might teach us about this era under study. Because if you want to understand a nation, well, there are many ways of understanding a nation and a people in a time period. An essential characteristic of any people, civilization and culture, are the laws that are passed by that culture. Going back to Hammurabi's code in Babylon, Egyptian laws, Anglo-Saxon laws, early American laws. Laws, if you look at the early evolution of slavery in America and the evolution of laws restricting Jews in Nazi Germany, laws are so vitally important to understanding a time period in people. They can tell us a lot. So as we read these 4 laws, think about that. What can these 4 laws tell us about the time period we're studying, about this newly emerging place we call America, California? What are California lawmakers concerned about in their new stage? Individually, What might each law offer us in evidence of the gold rush in early US California history? What groups did these laws target and for what purposes? And there are many other questions you might ask of these laws. The first law, 1850, the Foreign Miners Tax. In the minefields, there are people from all over the world. There are Anglo-Saxon Americans, because many young people caught gold fever. Youth from Illinois, from Kansas, from Texas, from New York are coming into California to strike it rich. But there are other young people from Mexico, and not only from Mexico, but there are Mexicans living in California who are native born, because that was their homeland just a couple years before America overtook Mexico, California. There are Chinese, there are French, there are English, there are German. There are young men from all over the world. And this tax is passed in 1850. Let's read this out. In response to white immigrant and Anglo-American hatred, competition, and violence at mining sites, the California legislature passed the Foreign Miners Tax in 1850. In order to dissuade foreign competition, miners who were not legally US citizens had to pay a $20 a month fee. And that was a lot of money back then. That is around $700 in a 2020 adjusted scale. The fee was dropped just 2 years later to $4 a month. That is around $130 in 2020. Although the tax was created for all foreigners, one of the main targets was Mexican Californians, who were supposed to have been protected under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo as American citizens, but were in fact treated as foreigners in a land that was once their homeland. Chinese immigrants were another major target. In 1855, 5 years later, the California legislature passed another law specifically targeting Mexican Californians called the Anti-Vagrancy or Anti-Greaser Law of 1855. 1855, the Anti-Greaser Law. Akin to the vagrancy laws included in the Black Codes passed in the South in 1865, the California Anti-Greaser Law of 1855 sought to control, restrict, and bind Mexican Californians in an Anglo-controlled new American California. The law was specifically designed to cast a wide net in controlling and capturing Mexican Americans, or greasers, as stated in Section 2. All persons who are commonly known as greasers, and greaser was a derogatory term. So all persons who are commonly known as greasers, or the issue of Spanish and Indian blood, who may come within the provisions of the first section of this act, and who go armed and are not known to be peaceable and quiet persons, and who can give no account of themselves, may be disarmed by any lawful officer and punished otherwise. This is only a small excerpt from the law that clearly states who the law is targeting. The above passage describes a great majority of young men during this stage in California history. Yet Mexican American men, or greasers, are singled out as criminals. 1862, the Anti-Coolie Act. And coolie, like greaser, was a derogatory term. It was a derogatory term for Chinese workers. California's Anti-Coolie Act of 1862, an act to protect free white labor against competition with Chinese coolie labor, and to discourage the immigration of the Chinese into the state of California, April 26, 1862. This is 1 year into the Civil War. The Anti-Coolie Act attempted to place a heavy burden on Chinese workers in California, taxing Chinese in California at a rate of $2.50 when the average Chinese worker made between $3 and $4 a month, placed an enormous, unbearable, and unpayable for most weight on their shoulders. This act must be seen as part of a larger vision of white America for white America. Laws restricting Black bodies, Mexicans, and natives are all part of the same era, the century of the Anglo-American attempting to restrict and push out peoples who did not conform to a particular racial and cultural ideal. In 1882, the federal government will pass a Chinese Exclusion Act, barring any further immigration from China. As we examined in another presentation, the law was based entirely on ignorance, false fear, and pure racism. And here is a small excerpt from the Anti-Coolie Act of 1862. Section 1. There is hereby levied on each person, male and female, of the Mongolian race, of the age of 18 years and upwards. Now, they called all Chinese, this means all Asians, Chinese, Mongolians. Although we know, right, Chinese and Mongolians are different. Residing in this state, except such as shall, under laws now existing, or which may hereafter be enacted, take out licenses to work in the mines, which was another fee, or to prosecute some kind of business, a monthly capitation tax of $2.50, which tax shall be known as a Chinese police tax, provided that all Mongolians exclusively engaged in the production and manufacture of the following articles shall be exempt from the provisions of this act: sugar, rice, coffee, tea. All things, of course, that Anglo-Americans desired. Those people engaged in those activities are exempt from being taxed. So we all need our coffee and sugar. Okay. The fourth act. So we had an act placed on foreign miners that targeted specifically Mexicans and Chinese. We have an Anti-Greaser Act, which was an anti-Mexican act. We had an Anti-Coolie Act, which was the Anti-Chinese Act. And this is really an anti-Native act. Although it's called an act for the government and protection of Indians, it was not. Like the Black Codes passed by Southern states in the Anti-Greaser, Anti-Coolie, and Foreign Miners Tax, the 1850 Indian Law sought to control the movement, freedoms, and labor of Indian peoples in California. Like the vagrancy sections in both the Black Codes and Anti-Greaser laws, this act attempted to specifically bind the lives of young people and even children. Targeting the structure of the Native family, the 1850 law sought to dehumanize, terrorize, and destroy Native peoples. There is no greater tool of terror than to steal a child away from their parents. And this law allowed white settlers to steal Native children. Read and examine the following excerpts from the 1850 law. Here's a photo of Peter Hardeman Burnett, California's first governor, circa 1860. April 22nd, 1850. These are just small excerpts from this law. The people of the state of California, represented in Senate and Assembly, do and act as follows. Section 3. Any person having or hereafter obtaining a minor Indian, a youth, child or youth, male or female, from the parents or relations of such Indian minor, and wishing to keep it, such person shall go before a justice of the peace in his township, with the parents or friends of the child. And if the justice of the peace becomes satisfied that no compulsory means have been used to obtain the child from its parents or friends, shall enter on record in a book kept for that purpose the sex and probable age of the child, and shall give to such person a certificate, authorizing him or her to have the care, custody, control, and earnings of such minor until he or she obtained the age of majority. Every male Indian shall be deemed to have obtained his majority at 18, and every female at 15 years. Now you can see by reading this law that there's room for so much abuse of power. Imagine the multivarious scenarios of capturing, kidnapping, stealing a native child and going to court and saying, yeah, this person is the guy's friend, the family friend. He says it's okay. This is a ridiculous law. This is a law of terror, from my perspective. Now you have to keep in mind, right, that at this time in America, Native Americans are seen as savage. They're not seen on the same level as white Americans. They're seen as savage, barbaric, as even lesser humans that need to be eradicated in order to make way for white America. This is the vision of America. Now, of course, not all Americans believe this, but overall, this is the vision that Americans have. And there are deep-seated antagonisms why Native Americans are seen as savage. It goes down deeply rooted in culture and religion, the Old Testament, manifest destiny, just war on savages. There are many reasons why Americans feel empowered to be so violent against Native Americans. There are reasons, deep-seated cultural reasons from their perspective why this is justified. I'll read a couple more out. So one more and you can read the rest on your own. Section 4. Any person having a minor Indian in his care, as described in the foregoing section of the Act, who shall neglect to clothe and suitably feed such minor Indian, or shall inhumanely treat him or her, on conviction thereof, shall be subject to a fine not less than $10, at the discretion of a court or jury, and the justice of the peace. In his own discretion, may place a minor Indian in the care of some other person, giving him the same rights and liabilities that the former master of said minor was entitled to. So, if a person who stole the child in the first place starves the child and doesn't clothe the child, then that child can be taken away from that white settler and given to another white settler who's going to reasonably feed his Indian slave and clothe them. So the least they can do is not let them starve. Think about these laws, what they mean for the culture at the time that's creating these laws. Now think about history. This was not that long ago. There are laws from ancient Babylon that seem more humane than these laws. And this is 1860 may seem like a long time to some of you, but in historical terms, it was yesterday. It wasn't very far away. There's so many vantage points to think about when you're reading these laws. What they meant for the culture at the time. The psychological impact it had on Native populations. The psychological impact it had on white people who were stealing these children. The ramifications and consequences of these laws for subsequent generations in California, white and Native. Peter Burnett again. Burnett, sorry. Here's a quote from Peter Burnett. That a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct must be expected, he told legislatures in the second state of the state address in 1850. Well, we cannot anticipate this result, but with painful regret. The inevitable destiny of the race is beyond the power or wisdom of man to avert. So he's saying, listen, Indians are going to be done away with because this is destiny. And it pains me. I have painful regret just thinking about this, that one day the race will be annihilated. But it's the inevitable destiny of both our races that this will happen. And it's beyond the power or wisdom of any man to try to stop it. A war of extermination will continue to be waged until the Indian race becomes extinct. 1851. Yeah. This is U.S. Senator John Weller in 1852, later became the California governor. California Indians will be exterminated before the onward march of the white man. The interest, the white man, demands their extinction. Now, this is an aspect of manifest destiny that you may not have learned in elementary school or middle school or high school whenever you first hear that word manifest destiny. Here's some points. In 1856, the state of California paid 25 cents for each Indian scalp. This is the state of California. The government of California put a bounty on the head of every native. So say you're 19 years old, you from Illinois, you got gold fever, you went to the gold mines, the work was too damn hard, or you found gold, but you went to San Francisco and blew it all on prostitutes and drugs, and now you're dead broke. And you see a poster saying that the governor is paying you 25 cents for each Indian scalp. And all you gotta do is go kill some savages and bring their scalps to the capital. What do you do? In 1860, the bounty was increased to $5. 1860, $5. That's a lot of money. You go kill 5 or 6 natives, you got a lot of dollars in your pocket. Between 1850 and 1861, California spent $1.7 million on 24 different Indian killing militia campaigns. Congress paid the state back all but $200,000. Between 1846 and 1873, up to 16,000 natives were murdered in California by settlers, vigilantes, state militiamen, and federal soldiers. That's not too far long ago, folks. Between 1850 and 1870, Los Angeles' Indian population fell from nearly 4,000 to just above 200. Imagine yourself to be one of the remaining 200. I try, but I don't think I come close at all to imagining what that would have been like for most of your family and your whole people eradicated by settlers. What do you do the rest of your life? How do you live out your life? It's a beautiful painting of Albert Bierstadt, a German who came to the United States to paint the amazing vistas of the westward push. This is looking down Yosemite Valley, 1880. Celestial, ethereal, magnificent, outdoor cathedrals. Before the gold rush, the California native population is estimated at around 300,000. That's like 100,000, or that's a little less than Fresno city proper. Within 2 decades, more than 100,000 would perish. In the ensuing years of the gold rush era, most natives died from disease or mining-related accidents. although more than 4,000 were murdered by white miners. Side note, following the Civil War, approximately 4,000 African Americans were lynched during the Jim Crow era. And those are the only ones that we have documented. The violence done to natives and blacks must be seen in context with one another. And here are some quotes from Sutter's Mill, where gold is first discovered. And this is a wood etching of John Sutter. The first quote is from Heinrich Leinhardt, one of Sutter's managers. I had to lock the Indian women, and again children, together in a large room to prevent them from returning to their homes in the mountains at night. Large numbers deserted during the daytime. So Indian slaves were kept at Sutter's Mill and forcibly kept there as captives to work and not allowed to go back home. The next one is from Pearson Redding, another one of Sutter's managers. The Indians of California make as obedient and humble slaves as a Negro in the South. And this is why how the natives are being treated must be seen in the same context as how blacks are being treated in the South. It must be. We must connect West Coast history and Southern and East Coast history together. Because often we research and write them as separate entities, but oftentimes they're part of the same period or national vision. I'll read this over. The Indians of California make as obedient and humble slaves as a Negro in the South. For a mere trifle, you can secure their services for life. And the next quote is from a California native. My grandfather was enslaved by Sutter to help in building the forts. While he was kept there, Sutter worked him hard, and then fed him in troughs like an animal. As soon as he could, he escaped with his family and hid in the mountains. I've read slavery oral witness accounts of their lives of slaves in the South, and a few of those I've read and heard, they were fed in troughs like animals. Horrible. Here's another quote by Indian Commissioner G.M. Hansen in 1861. In the month of October last, I apprehended 3 kidnappers about 14 miles from the city of Marysville, Northern California, who had 9 Indian children. So just stop right there. Obviously, they are in accordance with, they're observing the California law, protection of Indian law, and they're taking Indian children. I'll start over. In the month of October last, I apprehended 3 kidnappers about 14 miles from the city of Marysville, who had 9 Indian children from 3 to 9 years of age, which they had taken from Eel River in Humboldt County. One of the 3 was discharged on a writ of habeas corpus upon the testimony of the other 2, who stated that he was not interested in the matter of taking the children. After his discharge, the 2 made an effort to get clear by introducing the 3rd as a witness, who testified that it was an act of charity on the part of the other 2 to hunt up the children and then provide them homes for them, because their parents had been killed, and the children would have perished with hunger. My counsel inquired how he knew the parents had been killed. Because, he said, I killed some of them myself. That's an amazing quote. Another quote, 2 more, or another one. This is by Alta California newspaper, 1860. The militia led by Captain W.S. Jarboe. The attacking party rushed upon them, blowing out their brains and splitting their heads open with tomahawks. Little children in baskets, even babies, had their heads smashed to pieces or cut open. Mothers and infants shared the same phenomenon. Many of the fugitives were chased or shot as they ran. The children, scarcely able to run, toddled toward the squaws for protection, crying with fright, but were overtaken, slaughtered like wild animals, and thrown into piles. April 12, 1860, the state legislature approved $9 million for payment of the indebtedness incurred by the expedition against the Indians in the county of Mendocino. The governor wrote a personal thank you letter to Captain Jarboe. Picture that scene. 4-year-old children running toward their mothers, crying and screaming for protection, and being slaughtered by the U.S. Army. Now, for the rest of the slideshow, there are a couple of original source documents I'd like you to read. This one, another one, and then original source images that I'd like you to study each of them as evidence of the time period. What can these images tell us about the time period we are studying? What kind of historical information do they yield to us? Now I'll read this first prompt out for you. Examine the following eyewitness accounts from the gold rush era. What might the following excerpts tell us about the time period? Think about the original sources in the context of U.S. expansion, the westward movement, race relations, the energy and excitement of those years, and daily experiences the mind claims and elsewhere. Critically think about the documents and the original source images as documents as you go further in this slideshow. Please feel free to stop the slideshow as you read these. I will click probably at a faster rate that you may read. So those previous original source documents were very small excerpts from larger documents, and each slide contained a different eyewitness account. For the following slides, they come from the same eyewitness accounts. It's a young man traveling from the East Coast to San Francisco via Central America. And it's a very exciting read. There are only a few slides, so please read all the slides and try to imagine what it was like to be there and what his writing tells us about the time period. I'll read this first slide out. Examine the following eyewitness accounts written by Sheldon Schufelt in 1850. Born in 1818, Sheldon sailed on May 1849 from New York to San Francisco via the Isthmus of Panama. The following excerpts are from his letter, now held by the Library of Congress. Sheldon's letter offers us a valuable and fascinating window into the experiences of a young man seeking his fortunes during the gold rush. And there is the citation where you can find his larger document. Original source examination images. Examine the following images, photos, paintings, lithographs from the gold rush era. What might the following images tell us about the time period? Again, think about the original source images in the context of US expansion, the westward movement, race relations, the energy and excitement of those few years in daily experiences at the gold claims and in San Francisco. Well, that concludes our lecture on the California Gold Rush. I hope you enjoyed it, made you think, and we will see you next time.